Professor Gupta, we have requested that we will wait for till 5:35 to allow more people to join. Then we can start at 5:35. In the meantime, I'll mm, read the introduction about Professor Gupta. So, Dr. Gopal Gupta is currently an associate professor of philosophy and religion at University of Evansville in Indiana. This fall, he will be moving to Chicago, where he has received the inaugural Joe Dunham Distinguished Professorship in Ethics at Aurora University. Gopal Gupta teaches courses in world religion, science and religion, and religious ethics. His book, Maya in the Bhagavad Puran, Human Suffering and Divine Play, has been published by Oxford University Press. He also serves as the editor for the Journal of Hindu Christian Studies, JHCS. He holds a master's degree in science and religion and doctorate in theology and religious studies from Oxford University, UK. So we are very fortunate that Professor Gupta is giving his, time for all of us. Right now there is 6 a.m. at his place. So we thank him for this act of kindness that he is taking uh, so many austerities for all of us. And just by reading your Professor Gupta, by reading your this biodata, I came to know. It came to my mind that we can request to give you another lecture in the month of May, maybe 9th or and 16th May, on this human sufferings and divine play, the one which the book you have written. So this is a wonderful topic which touches the human sufferings, why we suffer, and how can we understand from the philosophy of Bhagavad Puran. So if your schedule fits in on those dates, probably you can touch upon these ideas.
We can discuss it. Thank you very much for the very kind introduction and invitation. It's very nice to be here again. Like last week, it was a very wonderful discussion, very lively program. So thank you very much for hosting it.
Okay, yeah. So I think we can start now. It's already the time is there now, and the sufficient number of participants are there. So 53 participants, so we can start. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Very nice to see all of you again. Actually, uh, this is a very wonderful program, and it's sort of a highlight. It's the highlight of my week to be with all of you. So and also today was daylight savings here in the United States. So actually, it's 7 a.m. for me now. So it's not as early in the morning because the clocks changed. Daylight saving is very confusing, and it makes life more confusing than easier. But yeah, it's now 7 a.m. here. So today we will continue with our discussion on science and religion. I've shared my slides here, and last time we talked about the problems that scientific materialism poses. So, what are some issues or problems in scientific materialism? And we found that how science itself does not intrinsically or necessarily lead to atheism. This is a misnomer, a misinterpretation of science to see science as intrinsically leading to atheism. And so this time I want to give a practical example of how there are scientific theories that are compatible with the idea of God, or that may have religious implications. and these are mainstream scientific theories. Now, there's two ways to argue for the existence of God using scientific evidence, so to say. And one of these ways is to argue based upon what science does not show. So science is unable to show how the eye is formed, and therefore we say God must have made it. This type of argument is called the God of the gaps. If there's a gap in science, then you put God there to explain that gap. And while it can serve in certain situations as a persuasive argument, it is a risky path to take, because if that gap in science is filled in by science, then all of a sudden the God that you have in the gap is filled in. So the God of the gaps argument is a weak argument. Rather, we like to argue for the self, for God, for spiritual things, spiritual realities, not based upon what science does not show, but rather based upon what science shows. So, not a God of the gaps argument, but rather an argument based upon scientific progress. That, well, science is progressing and science is showing, in fact, that there is a pathway from science to religion, a pathway from science to God or to a spiritual reality. So, one such theory, one such idea in science is Big Bang cosmology. And I think all of you in either high school or your studies, at some point in time, you must have come across this theory. It's called Big Bang cosmology. Big Bang cosmology is, you could say, the most commonly accepted, the standard theory regarding the origin of the universe. There are many scientific theories about how this universe came about. But the most well accepted, the most widely accepted theory, the standard scientific explanation for the beginning of the universe is Big Bang cosmology. So today we'll look at Big Bang cosmology, and based upon what it shows, we will see, is this an argument for God or is it not? As I mentioned, there have been other cosmologies also in scientific studies and in physics and astronomy, but they're not the standard scientific theories. For example, there's the idea of a steady state universe, which many scientists, especially historically, were very prominent. Um, like in these, I think, 17th, 18th centuries, these were people thought that the universe is just the way it is. It is sort of a steady state universe. And in fact, many scientists who are atheists would argue for a steady state universe in response to the religious idea of creation, that God created the universe. They would say, no, in fact, the universe is just always the way it is. It's a steady state universe. And therefore, there's no question of creation. But in fact, even atheistic scientists today agree that no, Big Bang cosmology is a more prominent or accepted, a more reasonable theory than steady state. Why? Because of some of the discoveries that Einstein made. Einstein saw that there was a cosmic radiation, Einstein and some other scientists as well. There's some cosmic radiation, and this radiation is expanding. It's always expanding, and if you measure it very carefully, you can see that it is expanding as time moves forward. So therefore, they thought, well, if it's expanding, it must have started from an original state of singularity, at an original point. Another option is an oscillating universe, which is the idea that the universe has a beginning, it has an end, and then it has a beginning again, and an end and a beginning again. So like this, the universe is oscillating. It's like a breathing universe. It goes out and it goes in, it goes out and goes in. This is a possibility, Big Bang cosmology says that, the universe starts from a singularity, and this this it expands, it blows up and expands. Now at the end, it's possible that it all comes back together again. Once it expands far enough and all the stars burn out and the sun burns out, it comes back again. However, that theory is also really not um, in much active discussion in scientific circles, because there's no exact evidence for it. What happens after this universe collapses, no one really knows. Uh, it is a theory, but it's, there's not there's not much of a scientific basis for the theory. There's just nothing much there to argue for it. And then there's also multiple universe models that, well, one universes inflate or deflate into other universes. There's an eternal inflation. There's multiple universes with connecting wormholes. So all of these models are there, and there's different ideas, and all of them have been carefully considered over time. And if you look at the history of the progress of this idea, um, the all scientists can say at this time, what they argue is that the universe um, began at a certain point and it is expanding, which is the Big Bang cosmology, we will be talking today. Now, this is a little diagram here of how the Big Bang cosmology works. So at t equals 0, there's an infinite singularity. Note that time begins at this point. It's t equals 0. In the first few seconds, the space-time theory is unknown. What exactly happens to space-time? There's some speculation, different theories are there. Then at t equals 3 minutes, things start to form. And then 13.7 billion years later, we find ourselves here today as we are existing presently. Now, a more detailed explanation of this is given in this table. So at t equals 0, there's an infinite singularity. At 10 to the minus 43 seconds, so this is 10 to the minus 43 seconds after the Big Bang happens, gravitational force separates. 10 to the minus 35 seconds later, strong nuclear forces separates. As I mentioned in the previous diagram, these are not fully verified, obviously. 13.7 billion years before, what happened at 10 to the minus 43 seconds, who can say exactly? But these are kind of the main ideas, main theories right now. 10 to the minus 10 seconds later, there's weak and electromagnetic forces separate. 10 to the minus 4 seconds, quarks to protons and protons to neutrons. And in 3 minutes, nuclei is formed. So the first basic, smallest atoms are formed, hydrogen and helium. And it's really just the nuclei of these atoms. 500,000 years later, you actually have elements coming together, further more atoms forming, and matter starting to take form. A billion years later, you have galaxies. 10 billion years later, planets form. 12 billion years later, microscopic life. And 13.7 billion years later, here we are today, talking about the Big Bang cosmology. So these are just some basic transformations or points in the timeline of the Big Bang. The key point that is valuable for our discussion today is that science in general today does not seem to support a beginningless universe, nor do philosophers nor does common sense, just our own intellectual exercise, nor does that also support a beginningless universe. Science today says, as we saw in these tables and diagrams that time starts when the Big Bang starts. There is a beginning to time. Why is this the case? Well, here's a scientist and a philosopher that try to explain this. Stephen Hawking, you might have heard his name. He says, if time were infinite, it would take an infinite time before anything happened, so nothing would happen. Stephen Hawking is saying, well, if time was infinite, it would take an infinite time before anything happened, so nothing would happen. Which makes sense. Why does common sense say that there should be a beginning of time, a beginning of the universe, when time actually began? Because if time started from minus infinity, and if presently we're at time equals 5, right? Let's say we're at time equals 5. Well, right now it's time equals 717. And it started at minus infinity. Then we would never be able to reach the present moment. Why? Because minus infinity is infinite. So if we started from minus infinity, we would never be able to reach the present moment. Because how could you reach the present moment? This is at least the argument. Many philosophers from the medieval times also argued the same thing. If the world were uncreated, then time would be infinite. But infinite time cannot be traversed. Hence, the present moment could not have come about. But the present moment does exist, hence the world had a beginning. Now you might think, well, what about the oscillating universe? What about the fact that, well, the world or matter could be beginningless? And so how can we say that time has a beginning? Yes, it is true that matter could be beginningless. However, the present universe, that is, in religious terms, the present creation, still in virtually all the world's religions, says that there is a beginning to the present universe. There is a time when this universe began. Similarly, science is also saying the same thing. Philosophers are also saying the same thing. That time, to make it sort of conceivable for us to even make sense of it, should have a beginning. That is t equals 0 for our present creation, so to say, for our present experience or creation. And, it's interesting, the Vedas, the Bible, they all talk about this also, that creation may go in cycles, but it still has a beginning at a certain point. That cycle has a beginning, that particular creation. So, according to Big Bang cosmology also, time begins when the Big Bang happens. Now, this raises the question, what is space? And another question, what is time? If time begins when the Big Bang begins, then what is space and what is time? And in general, we may ask this question, what is space? What is time? We talk about these things, but we measure time using clocks. But what is time? What is space? And how does it relate to creation? In classical Newtonian physics, Newton said that space and time are absolute. This was, if not the greatest, one of the greatest scientists of all time, who wrote the Principia Mathematica, who wrote many of the foundational laws of physics. He said that the universe is like a watch. It runs like clockwork. The entire universe. It's very precise. All the parts and pieces of the universe come together and they work perfectly together as one watch, very nicely, and it all runs like a clockwork. Now, Newtonian physics and Newton was convinced about this point, that space and time are absolute, and wherever you are in the world, you can measure time and you will get the same response. In the same way, wherever you are, whoever you are, if you measure someone's height, for example, they'll be the exact same height. Their space or their height is going to be the same. If you're on top of a mountain, I'm going to be 5'8", and if I'm sitting in my chair or at home, the length of my body is also going to be 5'8". Why? Because my space, my everything is always going to be the same. It's very precise. Well, when Einstein came along, he showed that how Newton was wrong. Newton was incorrect in his very fundamental or basic idea that space and time are absolute. And this also comes to illustrate our point in our previous lecture, that how science does change. Core scientific ideas over time are often shown to be wrong. And so therefore science itself is not necessarily a window into reality. In his general theory of relativity, Einstein showed that in fact space and time are relative. Space and time are not absolute entities, and there is no universal present. So my present is not the exact same as your present, meaning time is experienced differently for different people based upon where the observer is standing and how fast the observer is moving. Space and time are relative to speed and gravitational pull. So these are the two things that Einstein showed, that space and time are both connected with one another, they're both related with one another, and they're relative to the speed that you are traveling and also to the gravitational pull that you are experiencing. And this is something very tangible. Although it's something quite inconceivable, it is something measurable and very tangible. What Einstein is saying is that if gravity is affecting you less or more, you will experience a different time than if it's affecting you differently. And how does this exactly work? He said that time moves faster upstairs than it does downstairs. So the less the gravitational pull, if gravity is affecting you less, time will actually move faster. Why? Because space and time are actually elements in the universe, Einstein showed. And so it's a space-time fabric. And with gravity, this gets pulled. And if it gets pulled, time slows down. And so if you're farther than the source of gravity, which is large objects with a very large mass, exhibit a greater gravitational pull than lighter objects. Now, in our day-to-day life, the largest object that we are experiencing is this world, the Earth. The Earth itself has the greatest mass of all objects. So the farther you are from Earth, the less gravity will affect you. And therefore, time will move faster. The world's most precise clock confirms that time is indeed relative. So in order to test this, what did they do? Well, they put someone on top of the 100th story building, and they put someone on the ground floor. And they put an atomic watch on the ground floor and an atomic watch on the 100th story, and they measured the time. And in fact, after 1 year or 2 years, they found that the clock on the upstairs, on the 100th floor, experienced more time. That clock aged more than the person living downstairs, than the clock downstairs. Which the implication is that a watch strapped to your ankle will eventually fall behind a watch strapped to your wrist. Why? Because the watch on your ankle will experience less time than the watch on your wrist, because your wrist is higher than your ankle. Your head technically ages more quickly than your feet. This is why, some people have white hair, but they still look very young, because their head is aging faster than the rest of their body. Okay, that's a joke. The fact is, it does, but the difference is so small in how the difference of time is so small that you cannot actually, feel the difference. But yes, if you use an atomic clock, they can measure the difference of time. And they did measure it in something like, if you're on the 100th story, then after maybe 100 years or something, you experience 0.01 second more time than the person on Earth. So, if you want to live a longer life, then don't live on the 100th story, live on the ground floor. You'll live a longer life. Time passes faster for people living on a mountain than those living at sea level. So if you're on a mountain, life will go by faster than if you are on sea level. So gravity, as I mentioned, is one thing that affects the movement of time. Time is not an absolute principle, rather time is relative to gravitational pull. Another factor that influences space and time is a person's speed. So if you're moving extremely fast, that is, you're moving near the speed of light, you will actually experience the distance in front of you will shorten. You will actually experience less distance, less space than the person who is situated in one spot. Similarly, if you're moving very fast near the speed of light, then you will also experience less time than the person on Earth. The faster the observer moves, the more light is spread out and time slows down. Time slows down as you travel faster because momentum bends the fabric of space-time, causing time to pass slower. So time will actually pass slower. And this is why people talk about, time travel, or they talk about travel to the sun. That if someone's going at a very high speed, they will not only experience less space, the distance will shorten, but they will also experience less time. And therefore, they could travel that distance in a shorter time than if space and time did not change by that speed, which is very interesting. So the second factor, that is your speed, is something called relative velocity time dilation, where time moves slower as you move faster. So time moves slower as you move faster. The classic example of this is a twin scenario. One twin blasts off in a spaceship traveling close to the speed of light, and one twin stays behind on Earth. When the space-traveling twin returns to Earth, she's only aged a couple of years, but she's shocked to find that her Earthbound sister has aged over a decade. So this is an example, a classic example that they use, that if there's two, if there's a twin, brothers, and one of them, or twin sisters, and one of them goes to space and the other stays on Earth, the one that travels in space and comes back after many years will actually have experienced less time than the person on Earth. They actually experience less time. When traveling near the speed of light, space contracts and time, I always forget how to say this word, dilates. I see, I think it's misspelled here. I'm sorry. Or slows. Some of the motion through space can be thought of as being diverted into motion through time, and vice versa. In much the same way as a car traveling northwest diverts some of its northward motion towards the west. So when you're traveling very fast, space contracts and time slows down. And because space contracts and time slows down, you can, you know, travel very fast through space. And it's very interesting because many of the Vedic texts, they talk about how sages travel from one planet to another very quickly. And, perhaps if they can travel very fast, they actually experience less space and less time. So anyway, the point is that Einstein's theory of relativity showed us that space and time are not absolute, but they are relative. They are principles or elements within this universe that change based upon the position of the observer, based upon where the observer is standing and how fast the observer is moving. So space and time are elements in this universe. They are just like other elements. They are change and they modify based upon different factors. Well, what does this mean? This means that space and time are in the universe rather than the universe being in space and time. Paul Davies, in his book, The Goldilocks Enigma, he talks about this in detail. He's a well-renowned physicist, cosmologist, and science writer as well. The Big Bang was the explosion of space and time, not an explosion in space and time. In terms of Big Bang cosmology, what this means is that just like all the elements came out at that point, Big Bang cosmology would say that space and time also came out of the explosion. And the Big Bang did not happen in space and time, but it was the explosion of space and time. Now, this is no ordinary scientific discovery because it raises a lot of questions. If space and time are in the universe, rather than the universe being in space and time, and if the Big Bang was the explosion of space and time, then we really can't talk about the Big Bang in our normal language that we use. So this is what the problem is. The Big Bang happened outside of space and time. It did not happen in space and time, outside in quotes, because now there's no space at that point. So there's really no inside or outside. So we cannot ask the question, what happened before the Big Bang? Because there was no time. What happened before the Big Bang? Well, there was no time, so you cannot ask that question. We also cannot ask the question, where did the Big Bang happen? Because there was no space. And it's also difficult to speculate about what caused the Big Bang, because causes normally come before effects. Causes precede effects. So if there's no time, how can you really talk about cause and effect in the normal sense of the term? So you cannot ask the question what happened before the Big Bang. You can't ask where did the Big Bang happen. So what can you ask? Well, we could ask the question, what is the Big Bang then? If there's no space there, if there's no time there, then what is the Big Bang? What is this singularity that exploded and is the Big Bang? If there was no time or place before the Big Bang for causative agency to exist, then we can attribute no physical or material cause to the Big Bang. So in the previous slide, I mentioned to you how you really cannot speak about cause and effect in terms of the Big Bang, because those cause and effect are always related to space and time in our normal understanding. So if we are to talk about the cause of the Big Bang, that cause cannot be a physical or material cause. You follow? If we were to talk about what caused the Big Bang, in other words, why did the Big Bang happen? What is the Big Bang? If we ask this question, what is the Big Bang, which is a very reasonable question to ask. If we're going to talk reason and science, it's a very reasonable question to ask, what is the Big Bang? Then we cannot attribute it to a physical or material thing. Why? Because all physical or material things are things that have space and are in relation to time. I think all of us would agree with this. Now, if space and time were produced from the Big Bang, then the Big Bang itself should be something that is beyond space and time. Common sense tells us this. What is the Big Bang? Well, we cannot say. But we can define it negatively that, well, the Big Bang, therefore, is something that is beyond space and time, because space and time did not exist at that point. The Big Bang did not, the infinite singularity itself is not something that exhibits space and time. It produces space and time, so then it is something that is beyond space and time, right? So the question then that science is asking now, given Big Bang cosmology, even if we accept this theory of this Big Bang cosmology, which is the widely accepted theory about the origins of the universe, the question that scientists today, like Stephen Hawking in the past and today, scientists are asking is, what is then beyond space and time? If we ask the question, what is the Big Bang? Then we have to ask the question, what is beyond space and time? If we consider this question very carefully, then we understand that, well, this question sounds very familiar. Regardless of what the answer is, science today is asking the exact same question that religion has asked for millions of years, for thousands of years at least, right? The question that what is beyond space and time? So Robert Jastrow, an astronomer and self-described agnostic, he very starkly described the religious implications of Big Bang cosmology. And he does so as an astronomer and in very nice words. So please listen carefully. At this moment, as a result of Big Bang cosmology, it seems as though science will never be able to raise the curtain on the mystery of creation. For the scientist who has lived by his faith in the power of reason, the story ends like a bad dream. He has scaled the mountains of ignorance. He is about to conquer the highest peak. As he pulls himself over the final rock, he is greeted by a band of theologians who have been sitting there for centuries. Theologians means people who are trying to discover God or trying to discover spiritual realities. So he's saying that throughout science, in fact, has advanced so much that science has found, in some ways, its own limits. That is the limits of space and time. And if we ask this question, what is the Big Bang? We have to ask what is beyond space and time. And so now the scientist has, in some ways, advanced so much that it's reached the limits of science. And when it finds itself there, what does it find itself doing? It finds itself asking the same question that theologians have been asking since centuries. So now, if someone has been asking or researching a question for thousands of years, and someone else has just started to ask that question, who might you think might have a more persuasive or well-researched answer to that question? The person who's been asking it for thousands of years, or the person who just started asking it? Well, we would, by our own common sense, we would say that the person who's been asking it for thousands of years. So now all of a sudden, science is in the purview of religion. And therefore, those who say that, well, science and religion are completely independent of one another, non-overlapping magisteria, not so true now. Science has actually met religion. There's actually something where an area where they overlap, a question that they both today are asking. Fine, their solutions might be different, their answers and approaches might be different, but the fact is they're asking the same question. The other point is that if the Big Bang, and of course we cannot say this with certainty, we don't want to put words in the mouth of science, but if the Big Bang is something that is beyond space and time, if indeed it produces space and time and it is therefore beyond space and time, then isn't that also just another definition, a very common definition in religious traditions for God? God is someone or something or some entity that is beyond space and time. So with the words Big Bang, have the scientists maybe just replaced the word God with Big Bang? Have they replaced the word God with beyond space and time? Because space and time are limits of the material world. They limit what the world of matter is. And many scriptures of the world talk about the spiritual world as a place that is beyond space and time. What to speak of God, even just the spiritual world, the spiritual reality is something that is beyond space and time. So many religious practitioners see, in fact, that not only is Big Bang cosmology compatible with religious ideas, but it could even serve as an argument. And the key word here is argument, not a proof, rather an argument for a spiritual reality, for something that is beyond space and time. It could serve as an argument for God, because something or someone that is beyond space and time has produced space and time. And many, as you can imagine, even Christian theologians have capitalized on this point, that God is beyond space and time, and He creates this world of matter, creation ex nihilo, right? He creates it out of nothing. But even many scientists have recognized the religious implications of Big Bang cosmology. Going back to Stephen Hawking, he held the same chair of physics as Newton did at Cambridge University. So he's also one of the legends, one of the greatest scientists of all time. He says the odds against a universe like ours, emerging out of something like the Big Bang, are enormous. I think there are clearly religious implications. It would be very difficult to explain why the universe should have begun in just this way, except as an act of a God who intended to create beings like us. So Stephen Hawking, did not say that he ascribed to any religious tradition. He was more like an agnostic, but even he recognized that it has clearly religious implications. That why should the universe have begun in this way, except as an act of God who intended to create beings like us? So very powerful, poignant quotes. And therefore, many scientists today are looking to spirituality and religion to find pathways to cross the space-time barrier. Meditational research, consciousness studies, near-death experiences, past life remembrances, these are now becoming areas of science where people are realizing that our standard scientific methods of experiment won't work anymore. We won't be able to cross this barrier of space and time by combining some chemicals in our laboratory. No, we have to use some other pathways. And perhaps that pathway is consciousness. Therefore, they do meditation research. Through meditation, through the mind, through consciousness, maybe we can cross this barrier of space and time. Near-death experiences, people experiencing a different reality in a sort of a limbo near-death state, and also people claiming to remember past lives. Many psychologists and things like that have been studying these things as well. Recognizing the barrier of space and time, the sages of the past were therefore more interested in spiritual questions than material questions, because they were at this point that science is today. They recognize that whatever we can study in this world is within this space-time barrier. And so the greatest achievement of science can be to cross this barrier. The sages of the past could have studied the natural world in the way that scientists today have studied. But I would say that they were rather uninterested, because they were more interested in studying how to cross or how to surpass the barrier of space and time. And I'll end with this quote of Einstein, and then we can open it up for discussion, where he says, and here is the weak point of the positivists. So last time I talked about the logical positivists, you might remember, who said that everything has to be verified and everything has to be measurable if it is real. So this is the weak point of the positivists and the professional atheists, who feel happy because they think they have preempted not only the world of the divine, but also of the miraculous. Curiously, we have to be resigned to the miracle without any legitimate way of getting any further. I have to add the last point explicitly, lest you think that weakened by age, I have fallen into the hands of priests. So Einstein here is saying that it's not just that he became an old man, so he started to believe that there's something miraculous in this world or something divine in this world. He says no, that the more he studied the world, and he was such a genius. Time magazine said that it was either Einstein or Newton who was the greatest scientist of all time. And both of these people were open to religious ideas. Only the world of the divine, the world has a divine aspect according to them. And he's saying we have to be resigned to the miracle, that this world is miraculous. And the more he studied this world, Einstein said, the more he found that the world is a miracle. The world is miraculous. And there are elements or parts to this world that are sort of perhaps even intellectually understandable, intellectually you can model them, but really not fully tangible to us, and therefore miraculous. For example, just to go back to this point, even the theory of relativity, that time is relative, is something that we can conceptually understand, but really we cannot make sense of it in terms of our experience. In other words, how is it possible that one person sitting one place can actually experience less time than a person sitting in another place? Or that all of a sudden my height will be different for one person than another person. They will actually experience less space. We can speak of these things, math and science models these things, but we really cannot experience it. I mean, we cannot, there's no way to actually make sense of it. Well, how is this actually possible that time is relative? It's just something that we know is true. And, science shows that it is. But how it happens, why it is the case, or how do we actually experience this or make sense of this, that really we have no experience of. We don't know. So not just the Big Bang cosmology, not just the origins of the universe, but even what we experience today, even the universe that we live in today, is something that is very miraculous. So thank you. I'll stop at this point and we can open it up for discussion.
Okay, thank you, Professor Gopal Gupta. That was wonderful and eye-opening, really wonderful session. So I will request audience to put the questions in the chat window. And I have a couple of announcements to do. The first announcement is the participants who are newly joined, first time joining any session by ISS. So please drop your mobile numbers or email ID in the chat window so that we can add you in the this WhatsApp group or Telegram channel of ISS so that you can get the messages about forthcoming lectures. And also, we'll be doing from next week onward, we'll have a 7 session series on Bhagavad Gita. And so that will be going till 2nd of May. So I would request Indrajit Prabhu, if he is there, he can show the poster for just for the view of the audience. And after that, also there is one important announcement that we are there are few psychologists, psychiatrists, and neurologists who are connected with us, and they want to study the effect of mantra meditation on mental and physical health. So, if any of you wanted to participate in that research, you can also drop in the your interest in the chat window, writing meditation interested, or maybe the where we can understand. So we'll contact you how to go about that. So yeah, okay. So those were the announcements. Now let me see if any questions are okay. Okay, so the question has come from Arjun, that sir, I was unable to catch the point that after explaining the theory of relativity, you explained the time as beginning. So he want to understand what is that point.
Right. So, yeah, I actually missed saying that. Thank you for that question. So, the theory of relativity, by showing that space and time are relative, showed that space and time are elements in the universe. Because if they're relative, then they're not absolute principles. The universe does not rest in space and time, rather, space and time are in the universe. And what this means is that when the Big Bang happened, all the elements exploded from that infinite singularity uh, at the Big Bang, or you could say, when the Big Bang happened. And two of those elements, or one of those elements is space-time. So relativity showed that that space-time is an element in the universe that was produced at the time, or we cannot say a time, right? But was produced by the Big Bang. That's what the scientific theory is.
Okay, and so the another question is coming: can space and time quantize? So Bhanu Pratap Singh is asking. So Pratap, can you please elaborate? So he has mentioned, can space and time quantize?
Can you explain what you mean by the word quantize?
Yes, please. So Bhanu Pratap, you can give a little explanation, then I can read out. So another question is from Saurabh, but I don't know whether I think this is not connected with the lecture. If you would like to answer. So he's asking, why is it mentioned in the Bhagavad Puran that sun revolves around Meru mountain in Bhumandala? How is it reconciled with science?
Hmm. This is actually a different topic, so maybe we can come back to this if there aren't other questions. But let's see if we have questions on this topic.
Yes, you're right. Okay, so the question has come from Dr. Manjunath Ramanna. So he's asking, thank you very much, Professor Gupta, for the very informative class. If Big Bang Theory fails to explain creation, can you please explain us what should be the correct understanding of creation of this universe, which can be acceptable scientifically?
No, see, my point is not that Big Bang fails to explain the creation. What I'm saying is that if we accept Big Bang as an explanation for creation, which is what science today argues, that Big Bang cosmology is the standard explanation, the most widely accepted explanation for the origin of the universe in science, then that explanation is now begging the question, it now raises the question as to what is the Big Bang? And in answering the question, what is the Big Bang? We sort of through our own reason, through our own logic, arrive to the question, what is beyond space and time? It's now pointing towards a direction. This is the point, that Big Bang cosmology is leading us in a direction or pointing towards something that is beyond space and time. Something that was not necessary to ask before. One could have argued that, well, everything in this world is measurable, quantifiable, everything is within this purview of space and time. But now scientific theories themselves are saying that, well, space and time are relative, they're elements in this universe, so there's something beyond space and time. The Big Bang cosmology is pointing in that direction. So my point is that this theory is compatible with the idea that something beyond space and time could be an intelligence behind the universe, or could have caused the universe, um, and that is, now on the table for discussion.
Wonderful. So there's a comment from Brahmatirth Prabhu. So he's saying that Bhagavatam narrations of Vaikuntha indicate a sequence of events, which means time Vaikuntha is beyond space time.
Uh-huh. Thank you very much, Brahmatirtha Prabhu, for joining and for being here. Thank you for your nice comment. Yes, indeed, that the time that is mentioned in the spiritual planets, in sort of descriptions of Vaikuntha, that would be beyond the material space-time. And I was thinking about this also when I was also thinking about this, that we are saying that something beyond space and time has created this universe, but what about the narrations of space and time in the spiritual world? And indeed, there is time, and God can also act within time. But God himself, according to this theory, is beyond space and time. So according to the Bhagavatam and other spiritual texts, God is beyond space and time, but God can act within space and time. So even if we were to say that in the spiritual realm there is time, it would still not be a limitation to God. It would still not be a limitation to a spiritual reality. So time could be there, but in the material world, in the material sphere, that time limits us. That time causes death and is a liability. But time in the spiritual realm is present, perhaps like an element like in this world, but it does not have the negative effects like it does in this world. So, in fact, I think actually Einstein's idea that space-time are elements in this universe is actually very compatible with an idea of a spiritual world, because it's just one of the faculties that can be used for the purpose of lila or pastime. But the further restrictions that time brings in this world, for example, we cannot move back in time, those restrictions may not be present in the spiritual world. God is beyond time, God is a source of time, but God can also act within time. So, yes.
Wonderful. So, thank you, Brahmatirth Prabhu, for your presence here. So, just for the to tell audience, Brahmatirth Prabhu or Mr. Bob Cohen, he is the executive director of Bhaktivedanta Institute for Higher Studies. So, and he is also one of our guide for Institute for Science and Spirituality. So, we welcome him in our. I think he's a regular participant in ISS lectures. So, thank you, Brahmatirth Prabhu, for joining. Okay, so another question is from Jyoti Ranjan. We can never have perhaps sufficient reason to justify anything metaphysical. Then people tend to use God of gaps logic. What should be the right way to establish or disprove such a reality if it exists? Uh, Failing to find a sense of it, people prefer to be agnostic.
So it was a nice point. What was the question again? If you
Yeah,
could repeat it.
I'll read it again. So so he's saying we can never perhaps sufficient reason to justify anything metaphysical. Then people tend to use God of gaps logic. What should be the right way to establish or disprove such a reality if it exists?
Okay. Yes. Well, as I was mentioning, that the God of the gaps method is, it can be useful. It is, people can do what they want to do, and they can make arguments based upon the God of the gaps and make a persuasive argument. Like, look, there's just science is unable to explain this amazing phenomena, and our own experience shows that things like this don't come about by chance. So therefore, because science doesn't explain it, God is the explanation. That is a God of the gaps idea, and that is a reasonable argument. It's fine, but a more powerful argument, according to philosophers, is when we argue based upon what science shows, not based upon what science does not show. So, science has made quite a bit of progress, and many of the theories in science are compatible with religious ideas. They point towards God and towards spirituality. And so, if we make the argument based upon what science does show, like this is an example what we did today, science does accept Big Bang cosmology. Science and scientists, as we are seeing, are asking questions about things beyond space and time. Then such um, then such a viewpoint, so to say, uh, is very attractive because it's arguing based upon what science does show, not simply based upon the fact that science has not progressed enough, and then later on, if it does progress, then our argument, is removed. Of course, faith in God should not only be based upon reason. Reason or logic, philosophy is one of the key elements in our of God, in faith. But our faith in God should also be based upon our own experience of reality, and it should also be based upon um, the idea of what gives the most satisfying explanation for what makes most sense to us. Our understanding of God should be based upon our intuition, and then our intuition may lead to revelation, as we talked about last time, and then it's further deepened with the knowledge in Scripture and revelation. I was actually just reading recently um, about explanation, how we explain things or why we accept certain things, or the idea of justified belief. And this author, he was describing how there's two explanations that we can accept. One is an explanation which is the likeliest explanation. Another explanation is the loveliest explanation. So one is the likeliest, another is the loveliest. So science and reason is only about the likeliest. This is the most likely explanation based upon the data. But the most likeliest explanation is oftentimes not the one that resonates with our intuition the most. Okay, the most likely explanation um, uh, as to why uh, people love one another is because of some chemical reaction in the body. That's the most likely explanation. But the loveliest explanation is an explanation that is not only a likely explanation, but it also is um, more explanatory. It explains that phenomena in a more wholesome way. As we know, love is not just a chemical reaction, even though, in terms of measuring it, it is just a chemical reaction. But love has so many other factors involved. It has individuals, persons, self awareness involved. So, the loveliest explanation is sometimes an explanation that reaches beyond our limited reason and experience. The loveliest explanation is something that brings together many types of explanations because the truth that we accept is the one that is most satisfying amongst many possible truths. Uh, a scientist or a theologian can never 100% prove their theory. Why? Because the senses are limited. So even if you prove your theory, your senses are still limited. Your theory could be wrong. There's something that you may not have taken into consideration, and your theory could be completely wrong. What we do is we make arguments, and then we choose the best argument for a theory. And so explanation is more about accepting the theory that is loveliest, that is most satisfying, that resonates with us, with our reason, with our experience, and with our intuition the most.
Okay, so that was wonderful explanation. So the another question is coming from Shankar Das. So he's mentioning that currently we have understood the space and time in four dimensions window in which we have measured various constants for universe. And science had discovered certain constants like Planck constant to understand universe, but there are more dimensions need to be discovered by science today, which is impossible to understand by human mind.
Mm.
So what is your point of view on higher dimensions to understand universe? Besides
Mm.
this, what about new discoveries like string theory, quantum mechanics, multiverse? Need your point of view. Thanks.
Yes, so these are all very big questions. I mean, one more point I wanted to mention, and this relates with your question, is how just the idea of relativity, that time is relative, um, it resonates with the idea in the Bhagavatam that time is relative, and how 6 months of human time is equal to 12 hours of the time for demigods, and so there are indications that the world is not what it seems to be. The world is not just what it seems to be. That behind this universe, like Einstein pointed out, and Einstein had this intuition. Therefore, he said what he said. He didn't say it lightly. Einstein therefore said, behind what we see, there are other dimensions that are taking place. And it's possible that space and time are relative because there are other dimensions. In our experience, they're relative because other dimensions are in play. And like you so rightly said, these are beyond the reach of the mind. Although in mathematics, we solve equations using multiple dimensions, which is very fascinating to me personally. It was one of the most fascinating things to me as an undergraduate student. Just thinking that, well, math is real. We all, accept that, math works. It's a very real science. It's one of the most basic, hard sciences that we know. And math, just basic calculus, talks about 6, 7, 8, 10, 20 dimensions, and it solves problems by using these dimensions. Yet we cannot wrap our mind around it. In the same way, the Shastras are describing things and they're informing us that these things exist, yet we cannot really wrap our mind around them. So there's clearly something beyond the reach of our mind. And science uses different terminology, different words to describe that which is beyond. It says many dimensions. And religion might call it the many energies of God or something, more in religious language. But if we boil it down, both of them are talking about something very similar. The same thing is with consciousness. If you read, Daniel Dennett's Consciousness Explained, or these other books of materialists who believe that consciousness is a strictly material phenomena, at a certain point they start talking about consciousness in words that don't really relate to anything within our experience, like multiple drafts and um, these space-time fabrics and these ways in which Dennett himself says that we're using these words, but we really don't know what they mean. And I can show you quotes from what his writings are. He himself recognizes that this is mainly a matter of language. And so science uses more impersonalist language to explain what consciousness is. And religion uses more personalist language. But both of them recognize, okay, what self-awareness is, what consciousness is something that is very mystical, very wonderful. So, I hope I've answered your question. String theory, multiple dimensions, quantum theory, they are all dealing with the unknown and dealing with some things that are beyond the reach of our mind, but perhaps can be modeled in the form of metaphors. See, that's the other very important point, that religion uses metaphors to describe God and spiritual realities. But it's very important to note that science also speaks in metaphors. They use metaphors to describe ideas and things that we cannot actually understand. The very word Big Bang is a metaphor. There was no bang, according to scientists. There's just no sound at that point. There's no space and time, what to speak of sound. It's a metaphor. It really has no meaning. I mean, it just does not have any meaning. It's exactly opposite to what the logical positivists are saying science should be. That is, using words that have a tangible thing that it relates with. What is a Big Bang? It's a metaphor. Even the idea of relativity is a metaphor. And so science speaks in terms of metaphors and models. And similarly, religion also speaks in terms of metaphors. Like they say in the biblical, religions, they say that the streets of heaven are streets of gold. Now, whether or not they're actually gold, the same gold that we wear, is open to question. But it's a metaphor saying that it's a brilliant world, right? It's a metaphor to describe that reality. So the point being that um, uh, this is why Srila Prabhupada actually he defined science in a very wonderful way. He said science simply means thorough knowledge, right? Thorough knowledge. So religion was also talking about relativity since many, many generations. But what did science do that made it into science? Science added equations to it. It mathematically modeled it. People knew about relativity before Einstein, even outside of religion. In science, in scientific discussions, they talked about, relativity and the origins of the universe and all these things. But what was the contribution of scientists that made it so scientific, that now is called science, they they um, they came up with equations to model those ideas. So, what is science? It's a very thorough knowledge. It's when you take an idea and you really analyze it carefully. You you take it to a deep level. So, similarly, spiritual knowledge can also be of that nature. If it's very thoroughly analyzed, if it's experienced and deeply studied, it can be thorough knowledge. It can be very scientific in nature. Yes.
Wonderful. So, so just a small announcement in between. So, like Professor Gupta is explaining about spiritual science and all. So, I would request audience to register for the forthcoming seven-session Bhagavad Gita course, and that course would be taken by very prominent science people from the world of science and religion. So, it would be wonderful uh, program. So this will start from next week, 21st March to 2nd May. And these are the seven lectures we'll be taking: historical, cultural, and moral perspectives of Bhagavad Gita, then scientific heritage in Bhagavad Gita, lecture 1 and lecture 2, two lectures on this, and then five fundamental truths in Bhagavad Gita, again, two lectures on this, and then practical application. And this application, the first lecture is based on application on the self application, and the second one is for the societal application. So I would request audience to please register for it, and it's a certificate course, the practical theology and philosophy of Bhagavad Gita. So the participants who will come for minimum 70% attendance, they will get a certificate from Institute for Science and Spirituality. Okay, now coming back to the questions, please. Okay, so now the question is uh, the question is from Vaibhav Puri Goswami. So he's asking, the fact that Mahavishnu inhales and exhales
Hmm.
universes for a short time, according to his point of view, proves time dilation, proves time dilation as it is the entire life of universe. Can we say it is a proof of theory of relativity?
Um, we have to be careful with the word proof because um, we don't even prove, we cannot even prove that, we cannot even prove what the extent or size of the universe is, what to speak about whether or not the universe is contracting and expanding. Today, science says that there are 100 billion galaxies, each containing 100 billion stars. Right? 100 billion galaxies, each containing 100 billion stars. This literally means, that the universe is beyond our measurement or conception. We are not able to study one galaxy, but it's saying 100 billion galaxies, each containing 100 billion stars. And again, this is a metaphor. There's no exact measurement of these stars. No one, as far as we know, no one knows. There might be 101 billion stars, each containing 99. It's all just estimation. So, in terms of proof, we cannot really prove things, and even our acharyas, even the great sages, have said this, that through simple just reason and logic, you cannot prove things. Through our experience, perhaps through by becoming self-realized, we may be able to realize these things directly or factually. That may be possible, but just theoretically, it's not possible to prove these things. But what we can say is that the idea of Mahavishnu breathing universes in and breathing them out is compatible the um, with the idea of um, Big Bang cosmology. And um, that idea is compatible. That idea, a person can be a very good scientist and also a good religious person, and find similarities there, find things that resonate. Um, and they also speak about time being relative, how for Mahavishnu this is just one breath, and for us it's millions of years. And I also see in the chat box someone saying, well, is Mahavishnu inhaling and exhaling a metaphor? Well, um, the fact is, for those who practice the tradition, this is truth. For the practitioner, this is something that is true. But for the non-practitioner, it may be a metaphor. It depends upon a person's faith. So if we, if through reason and logic we come to the conclusion that there is a God and that what the Vedas are telling us is true, for us this may be truth. It may be something that is actually um, exactly the way things are. For another person, it may be metaphor. Also, just to clarify this point, that just because religion speaks in metaphors to explain to us certain things doesn't mean that all of religion and all religious ideas are metaphors, meaning that some things are beyond our understanding, so that we speak of them in terms of metaphor. And But that doesn't mean that Mahavishnu, God Himself, is not true, is not real. It doesn't mean that Mahavishnu may not be inhaling and exhaling the universe. It's quite possible that these are the things, these are the way they are exactly. These are the way things happen. But many times the scripture speaks in metaphors to make us understand how things are.
Okay, so another question is coming from Jyoti Ranjan. So we accept theological ideas as absolute, but scientific ideas change. So as you rightly said, logic is not sufficient. But experience is very subjective, even though it is very appealing as a first person experience. Is ontological existence a third person objective experience or limited to first person only?
Very nice question. Very good point. The only objective point of view is God's point of view. There's a very nice book by Thomas Nagel, The Point of View from Nowhere. And in that book, he argues that there is no point from nowhere. There's always a point of view from somewhere. Even scientists accept this. There's always a point of view from somewhere. And Einstein's theory of relativity actually establishes this fact, that there's always a point of view from somewhere. Why? Because wherever you are standing, space and time are relative to where you are standing. So the only objective point of view is from a point of view that's outside of space and time, that's beyond space and time, and that's God's point of view. Um, Even our understanding of God is relative because God is unlimited. We understand God from the place where we are standing. And God can reveal Himself to us. And therefore, we could get an objective point of view. If God desires, theologically speaking, one could get an objective point of view. If God reveals Himself. But just in terms of our own understanding, our own capabilities, our point of view is always subjective because we're limited by space and time. So, the from God's objective point of view, the universe is in a certain way, and the spiritual traditions say that that's what the scriptures are. The scriptures are describing the universe from God's point of view because they're written by God. The revealed scriptures, they're spoken by God, and therefore the knowledge is absolute. It's 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 absolute knowledge. But yes, through the experimental method, we can only come to relative knowledge. And my point of view will be different from yours. My experience will be different from yours. Um, my understanding will be different from yours. Absolute knowledge can only come from an absolute source. So, whatever that absolute source is, it can only come from an absolute source.
Wonderful. So there's a question from Subhash Goel, and he's asking, what is the link between empirical science and Vedic Sankhya science?
Hmm. What is the link between empirical science and Vedic Sankhya science? Um, by link, if you mean the meeting point, I think this is what you mean. Where does empirical science and Vedantic science meet? What are points where they touch? If that's what you mean, then I would say that um, the there's a few points. There's a few points that many points, but a few points where obviously they meet or there's a link there. One of these points are questions regarding time and space. As you'll see in this course that's coming up on the Bhagavad Gita, right? The Gita talks about five main themes, and one of those themes is time. The Gita is concerned with Kala or time. In the Gita, Krishna says, time I am time. So, time and space, and that which lies beyond space and time, is a link between Vedantic and empirical science. Another link is consciousness, the phenomena of consciousness, self awareness. How do we know that we exist? How do we know that we are persons or individuals? And how is it that we are conscious of ourselves and the rest of the world? So, a consciousness is another link. Um, Another link is mind over matter, so subtle energies and how subtle energies may be affecting other energies and other people in different ways. um, so there's a few different key links that or points of interaction or contact where science and religion can work together and uh, lead us towards the truth.
Okay, so another question is coming from Jaswinder Singh. He's writing, can we relate or compare Einstein's mass energy equivalence to God as if it is mass? Then it is physical world, and when it is transforms to energy, it is God, divine energy. So the two forms of God as Sagun and Nirgun. Just I think he's talking about a metaphorical understanding. So can we compare? I think E equal to MC square with God, Sakun and Nirgun.
I see. Well, when the Vedas say God is nirgun, then it means that God has no material qualities. And when they say that God is sagun, God has qualities, then they're not saying that God has material qualities, they're saying that God has spiritual qualities. So God is 100% spiritual. Um, and so God is beyond all of matter, including energy. But Prabhupada did use a metaphor. Since you're using a metaphor, and it's good to use, we have to find ways to understand. And Prabhupada says that the energy always comes from the energetic. In the same way, this entire material world, which is the energy of God, comes from God. Because God is the energetic, and this world is the energy. And it's the fact that, fundamentally, this world is energy. This world is, energy is equal to mc squared, right? Energy is equal to mc squared. So energy is fundamental. Now, the question is then what is the energetic? You see? So that metaphor is not so apt. That metaphor is within the universe. But that formula is very apt, because if this world is energy, then that begs the question, what is the energetic? What is the source of the energy? And that is God.
Wonderful explanation, Professor Gupta. So the next question is coming from Dr. Manjunath. If something is beyond our ability to accept, understand, experience, and also to experiment upon, like Big Bang Theory, how to accept such as realities.
Ah.
Should I
Well, I mean, yes. The thing is that there are certain indications in terms of cosmic radiation and their measurements of cosmic radiation, and certain ideas that are suggesting Big Bang cosmology. But surely Big Bang cosmology, the cosmologists themselves would say, is more unknown than it is known. I mean, how exactly, in a matter of less than 1 second, all these atoms form, and why should they form, and why should they form in the way that they do? No one really has an answer to those questions, and so it's not that scientists accept it. It's not that we have to accept it. Empirically speaking, this is the best explanation. And so the point here is that, empirically speaking, if this is the best explanation, then empirically speaking, we are being led to um, to spiritual ideas. Empirically speaking, the Big Bang cosmology is suggesting that the world is not what it seems, and behind this world is a spiritual, is a reality that is beyond space and time. So that's the point. It's not that we're accepting these ideas. We're saying, okay, what's the best idea out there? What's the best idea? Okay, empirically speaking, this is what the best idea is. So even reason, the point is that not that we accept that, but even just the empirical evidence, the reason is suggesting that there could be something deeper to this universe. And that's where science and religion meet. That's their meeting point.
Okay, so I think we will have to stop here because although a lot of questions are there, but the time is now, it is already 7:03. So I would request the participants to join next time, and we'll take your questions. And also, I am repeating my announcement that we want to, our research team is conducting a research on effect of chanting mantra on mental and physical health. So they need, if anybody of you want to participate in that research, so you can put your message in the chat window. You can write "am interested," so or you can write the complete word "meditation interested." So we'll contact you for that. And yeah, so this another international conference, virtual conference, is coming up on 22nd and 23rd May. And these are a few keynote speakers, but there are many, around 18 to 20 speakers, and wonderful speakers who have worked in the field of sustainability, and practitioners of spirituality, and they are parallelly there are practitioners of simplicity. So it's going to be a wonderful seminar. So a conference for 2 days. The conference themes are environment and eco-theology, environmental sustainability through spirituality, sustainable living through simplicity and spirituality, environmental sustainability through social and cultural heritage. So you can register for this conference, 3 years conference. Uh, the link is there. The link will be also put in the chat window, so you can register. And there are also the abstract submission is closing on 10th of April. So anybody uh, uh, you want to give your abstracts and participate in the conference, you want to present your paper, so you can also, so 10th April is the date, so you can drop your abstracts. You can go to the ISS website and register for the 3 years conference. Okay, so here we stop, and we thank Professor Gopal Gupta for the wonderful enlivening seminar on, it's a seminar series. And we would request if Professor Gupta, if he can spare some time for our at least one lecture for Bhagavad Gita, this series, and we can you can talk offline. And also for the wonderful. I think today's around 75 people were listening to you, and there were a lot of questions. So people are still asking. So I think people want to hear from you more and more. So that's why I was requesting you if you can uh, spare some time in future. Okay. So we stop
Thank you.
here. Thank you very much to all the participants. And we are sorry that some of the questions we could not take because of the paucity of time, but definitely we'll take in the next sessions. Thank you very much. Hare Krishna.
Thank you for hosting this. Thank you very much. Hare Krishna.
Thank you.